my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Brenda Dunne holds degrees in psychology and the humanities from Mundelein College and an MS in human development from the University of Chicago. She was manager of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory and has been working at the forefront of consciousness studies for a very long time. We are honored that she has chosen to carve out time in her busy life to join us. Would you please welcome with me Ms. Brenda Dunne.
Good evening. Delighted to be here. It is an honor to be part of this conference, which I believe is addressing one of the most important questions that we as humans can address: the balance between our analytical, scientific side and our metaphysical, emotional, experiential side. The study that I'm going to discuss briefly tonight and a little bit more extensively tomorrow is one that we used to refer to as the marriage of the white coat and the white turban. I have to introduce myself. I was the white turban. My colleague, Robert John, who passed away a year ago, was the white coat. He was the one who established the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, or PEAR lab, in the university, in Princeton University School of Engineering back in 1979. His interest in the topic really was quite far from his traditional or canonical academic interest, which was advanced aerospace propulsion systems. But for his sins, he served as Dean of the School of Engineering for some 15 years. And in that context, he had an opportunity to supervise an undergraduate independent project. This student was interested in exploring whether human consciousness could influence random physical systems. She had gone to a number of her faculty members who said, we don't know anything. No, go do it in something a little bit more appropriate. But she recalled that when she had entered the university as a freshman, Dean John had welcomed them by pointing out that if they did well in their studies, when they got to be upperclassmen, they could do their independent work on any topic of their choosing, and she was calling him on it. So he gave this a bit of thought, and I'll make a long story short, but basically he came to the conclusion that whether or not there was anything to the anomalous phenomena, he thought that the design and construction of a random event generator was a perfectly legitimate project for an engineering undergraduate to undertake. So he agreed to supervise it. And by the time the student finished her project, a couple of years later, and frankly lost interest in the topic, it left him scratching his head and saying, what do I do with this? If this is for real, if the results that she produced are for real, then engineers ought to be studying it. This has important engineering implications. So he went around about establishing the program with some, more than some resistance from his university administration, and with the financial support of an aerospace colleague of his, Mr. James McDonald, who offered to fund the program. And for whatever reason, our paths crossed, and he invited me to come and work with him as his laboratory manager. And in the spring of, or I guess the summer of 1979, I went to Princeton, and we proceeded to set up the program. The PEAR program basically had three components. One of them was a body of experiments in human-machine interaction, whereby the question was whether human intention or human consciousness could actually affect the behavior of random physical systems or processes. This was basically next extension of the student project. The second part of the program was a series of experiments in what we call remote perception. Other people know it more popularly as remote viewing, where people claim to acquire information about distance, locations. And there our purpose was to see if we could develop some quantitative methods whereby we could actually measure an amount of information that was being acquired in this process. And the third part of the program was the part of the program that was, what is going on here? Basically, can you develop some kind of theoretical model that can accommodate experimental evidence that was coming out of these research efforts? Now, the program actually started off as a very pragmatic one, namely to see whether modern engineering technology was susceptible to anomalous influences associated with the consciousness of their human operators. Our focus was on the machines, not on the operators, not on the humans. And over the ensuing 28 years, we generated, or our experimental participants generated, several millions of trials in both of these categories that gave us some very interesting and suggestive insights into what might be going on. One of the, that's a longer story, but one of the important things that we noticed was that when we talked to our participants about how their experiences, they almost inevitably said, you know, it's more than me just having an intention. I have to have some kind of a resonance or a sense of emotional connection with the process or the machine. If I'm not emotionally involved, it doesn't seem to work. So there's more to it than just the intellectual side. Another part that was rather interesting was we found that if we took our random event generators into larger venues where there were many people, large groups of people who were involved in some sort of emotionally shared experience, maybe a concert, maybe a play, maybe a religious service, and we just had the random event generators running, we were seeing results that were really quite strong, in many cases much stronger than what we were seeing in the laboratory. But perhaps the most intriguing and puzzling aspect of these experiments was their non-locality. Namely, we found that the experimental machines could produce the results, the effects we were seeing, even when the human operators were up to thousands of miles away. Not only did distance not matter, time didn't matter. People could generate their intentions up to several days or even weeks before or after the machines were run. Didn't make any difference. This non-local phenomenon really raised important challenges to the scientific interpretation of what was going on here. It was very clear that there was no physical, no psychological model that could accommodate the effects of this type. The only thing that possibly could be associated with it was in a metaphorical sense when you ask where else do you possibly see situations where a very tiny effect can compound over many millions of events, many millions of trials to produce a shift in a distribution mean. How about evolution? Are we looking at something that might be what used to be called the elan vital, the life force? And where does consciousness come into it? Because clearly the non-local results indicate that what we were seeing were not effects that were being generated by the physical brain of the human operator sitting in front of the machine. So anyway, I think I'm out of time, so I will leave it at that and leave you with the question of, well, the question of this conference. what is consciousness? Is it something that can be studied using scientific techniques and methods? Is science itself independent of consciousness, or is science an activity of consciousness? And if so, can science study itself in that way? Is consciousness perhaps something more than just what motivates our cognitive activity, but something much more broad and much more profound than that? Is it possibly some kind of primordial organizing principle? Is it that which drives the creation of reality from the ground up? In any event, as I said, I've run out of time. I haven't been watching the clock, and I apologize if I've taken too long. But thank you, and I hope to speak to you, or many of you again tomorrow. And thank you for coming.